Look with me at Romans 11, verse 6. This is something we absolutely need to understand if we're going to understand grace today. And if by grace, then is it no more of works. Otherwise, grace is no more grace. But if it be of works, then is it no more grace. Otherwise, work is no more work. What Romans 11:6 says, and if by grace, then is it no more of work, otherwise grace is no more grace. But if it be of works, then is it no more grace, otherwise work is no more work. And what that is telling you is that it's either one or the other, but it's not a combination. If it's by grace, then it's not of works. If it's by works, then it's not of grace, but it's not 50-50, it's not 75-25, it's not 99-1. It's either all grace and no works, or it's all works and no grace. That principle, my personal opinion, is one of the most important principles to get clarity on today. And the reason why I say that is in conversations with people, God saves by grace, but is, you use the term but to contradict what you just said, right? And I'll prove it to you. Look your wife deep in the eyes and say, I love you, but. And she will have crystal clear understanding of the English language, and if you didn't understand that but denies what came before, she'll help you get to clarity on that. You all know this, right? So when people say, God saves by grace, but they're about to deny grace. God saves by grace, but you gotta live it. You just denied grace. God saves by grace, but you can lose it if it's a denial of grace. This is existentially important. This is the difference between heaven and the lake of fire. So we're going to talk about this for a minute. The point of Romans 11:6, just to start, is this. You really have two options. You can be saved by grace or you can save by works. Those are your two options. So now let's look at this just for a minute. Romans 3, verse 20. Romans 3, verse 20. So conceptually, theoretically, being saved by works is an option. But read Romans 3:20. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. So Paul says in Romans 11:6, one of the options, but if by works, then is it no more grace, otherwise work is no more work. That is a intellectually possible option, but in practice, is there anyone justified that way? No one, according to that verse, right? Just look at it again, Romans 3:20. Therefore, by the deeds of the law shall no flesh be justified in his sight. Is there anyone on earth that is justified by the law? And the answer is no. And it then makes the point, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. So if you think you're justified by the deeds of the law, have at it. Go for it. And what will the law produce, according to that verse? The knowledge of sin. So the more that you try to justify yourself by the law, what should become increasingly clear to you moment by moment? I am absolutely failing in this effort to be justified by the law. Every day it gets worse because I just keep failing more and more. Romans 4, verse 4. Now to him that worketh is the reward not reckoned of grace, but of debt. There's a fundamental difference between salvation by works and salvation by grace. At the end of the week, when you receive a paycheck, you receive the paycheck as a matter of debt. It's an obligation that the company owes to you. They're not giving it to you by grace. You worked for it, and now you're entitled to it. Let's read verses 4 and 5 together. Now to him that worketh is the reward not reckoned of grace, but of debt. But to him that worketh not, but believeth on him that justifieth the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness. Verse 4 makes the point that works is the opposite of grace. They're different. Verse 5 makes the point that works is the opposite of faith. Well, if works is the opposite of grace and works is the opposite of faith, that tells you that grace and faith go together, doesn't it? And in fact, you're saved by grace through faith today. Get 2 Timothy 1:9. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 9. 2 Timothy 1:9, who hath saved us and called us with an holy calling, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace. Are works and grace different? Yes, because it's not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace. Titus 3, verse 5. Titus 3, verse 5. Not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy he saved us. Again, again, and again. Those verses are telling you, you can be justified by works, you can be justified by grace. It's not a combination of the two you have to pick. And by the way, can you actually be justified by works? No. So what is the only option that is available to you whatsoever? And that is justification by grace. So I'm going to give you an illustration here, and I'm going to take the pearl of great price. So you recall in the scriptures that there is a parable of the kingdom of heaven that references the kingdom of heaven as the pearl of great price. So I'm going to take it a little bit different and do something different with it, and here's what it is. So imagine there's this pearl of great price that you want, and let's say the value of it is $20 trillion, some just immense sum. It's incredibly, incredibly priceless. And the owner of it says, I'll give you two options. Option one is you can just pay me for it. Just give me the 20 trillion and I'll give it to you. So option one is you can just buy it. And option two is I'll give it to you free. You can have it. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to give me anything for it. I'll just give it to you. So those are the two options. Here's what man says. I'll give you $1 for it. Now, what's the problem with saying, I'll give you $1 for it? If the owner of it was really going to sell it, would he sell it for $1? If it's worth $20 trillion, would he sell it for $1? No. When he offered to give it away, that was a gracious gesture. It was the acknowledgement, I know there's no way you could ever earn what it takes to have this, but I'll just give it to you out of my goodness. So when man says, let me give you $1 for it, what's really going on? What's going on is man doesn't want to say, well, you just gave that to me. Man wants to say, I deserve it. I earned it. I bought it. See, if he gives him $1, he can say, well, I paid for it. That analogy fits perfectly with how people think about grace today. Because think about this. Doesn't Scripture describe the blood of Christ as precious? If you took all the money in the world, you gathered all the gold, all the silver, all the precious stones, all the land holdings, all the stocks, everything, and you said, well, God, I'll give that to you in exchange for the blood of Christ, what would God say? What you have is nothing. Everything you have is perishable. If you acquired all the wealth of the world, let's say you somehow could do that. You acquired all the wealth of the world. What's going to happen to everything on the earth in 2 Peter 3? It's going to be incinerated. So what have you really acquired of any eternal value? And the answer is nothing. Nothing at all. What man does is when people say, God saves by grace, but you got to live it, they're offering $1 for the precious blood of Christ. That's what they're doing. Here's what I'm contributing. God saves by grace, but then I got water baptized. And that completed the righteousness that was necessary for my salvation. Do you see how that's just absolutely, utterly preposterous? Look with me at Ephesians 2, verse 8. Ephesians 2, verse 8. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9 make the point multiple ways that salvation is not anything you can earn or contribute to, but you have to receive it as a gift. Ephesians 2, verse 8. For by grace, grace is unearned, unmerited favor. For by grace are ye saved through faith. Faith is believing or trusting something. You can't really boast in that. And that not of yourselves. So what does Ephesians 2 say about your resume of good works? It's worthless. It is the gift of God. Well, if it's a gift, then you didn't earn it. Verse 9, not of works. Do you see how these verses are saying again and again and again, it's not you? It's a gift. It's not of works. You receive it by grace through faith. Now notice the last part of this verse. We're in verse 9. Lest any man should boast. And I'm just going to submit to you that that right there is the crux of the issue. God saves by grace. He doesn't expect you to work for it. You could never earn it. The gospel is designed in a way that excludes boasting. And that, I'll suggest to you, is the offense of the cross. The offense of the cross is this. What the cross says is all those things you're proud of, all those things you boast in. I'm basically a good person. I've given to charity. I live by the golden rule. I'm kind to my fellow man. All those things that man says, look at my resume, the gospel says that's all worthless. If you add up all those good works and you also keep track of all of your sins, are these good works enough that God says, well, you've done such a great job, I got to let you into my heaven despite those thousands of sins? He doesn't do that. The gospel is an offense to man's self-righteousness, is what it is. Look with me at Romans 3, verse 27. Now, Ephesians 2, 8, 9 says, not of works, lest any man should boast. Notice with me Romans 3, 27. Where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law? Of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. So let's take that apart and make sure we get it. Faith is excluded. What principle excludes? Boasting is excluded. What principle excludes it? Not works, because works you could boast in. Boasting is excluded by the law of faith. So let's go back to this just for a minute. God saves by grace, but, and after the word but is where people add the thing they're going to boast in. They add the work. But according to Romans 3:27, boasting is excluded because salvation is not of works, it is of faith. So one more point and I'll move on. The man that offers the $1 for the pearl of great price is the same as the man who says, God's grace does most of it, but you gotta do your part. You gotta do this or you'll lose it. You can't do that sin or you would forfeit it. That right there is the $1. It's the work that man wants to boast in. Let me put it this way. If God designed the gospel so that instead of it being 100% grace, it was 99.9% grace, and that if you just gave $1 to the church, then God would save you, you know what would happen? The number of people that would do that would be immense. Because they would say, well, this is great. Because then all I have to do is pay this one little dollar and I get eternal salvation. And what I really want is I did it. See, I am entitled to that salvation because I paid my dollar. And what God will do, God will save the most wicked wretch on this earth, but He will not save them in their boasting. And fundamentally, it is man's self-righteousness that keeps him from being saved. The gospel is the offense of the cross.